The sleepy town of Westfield, nestled deep in the heart of the Midwest, had always been a place of quiet solitude, where the gentle hum of cicadas and the rustling of cornfields lulled the residents into a false sense of security. But beneath the tranquil surface, a dark and unsettling history lurked, a legacy of unexplained disappearances that had plagued the community for generations. It was into this eerie atmosphere that Sarah, a curious and determined college student, found herself drawn. Her initial fascination with the Slender Man urban legend had only intensified after a classmate had vanished without a trace, their disappearance joining the ever-growing list of unsolved cases that had haunted Westfield for decades. As Sarah sat on the rickety porch of her rented bungalow, her hazel eyes scanning the dusky horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking just beyond the reach of the fading sunlight. The soft breeze carried a hint of unease, a whisper of the unknown that had long since taken root in this small town. "Hey, you're out here brooding again," a familiar voice called out, snapping Sarah from her reverie. "I thought you'd be inside, buried in your books as usual." She turned to see Tom, her boyfriend, ambling towards her, a concerned frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. Though he shared her skepticism of the supernatural, he had always been a loyal and supportive presence, even in the face of her more unconventional pursuits. "I can't stop thinking about it, Tom," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what happened to Carla and all the others before her. There has to be more to this than just a simple disappearance." Tom settled onto the porch beside her, his brow furrowing as he studied her troubled expression. "I know you're worried, but you can't keep obsessing over this. It's not healthy, and it's not going to bring Carla back." Sarah shook her head, her fingers fidgeting with the worn edges of the notebook in her lap. "I can't just let it go, Tom. There's something going on here, something that the police and the townspeople are either ignoring or are too afraid to acknowledge. I need to find out the truth." Sensing the determined glint in her eye, Tom sighed heavily, his hand reaching out to gently squeeze her shoulder. "All right, I know I can't talk you out of this, but promise me you'll at least be careful, okay? I don't want you getting in over your head." Before Sarah could respond, the front door swung open, and their friend Jenna bounded out, her eyes alight with excitement. "Guys, you'll never believe what I just found." Sarah and Tom exchanged a quick look, their conversation temporarily forgotten as they turned their attention to the tech-savvy girl. "What is it, Jenna?" Sarah asked, her curiosity piqued. "So I was doing some digging online, trying to find any information I could about the recent disappearances, right?" Jenna explained, her words coming in a rapid-fire rush. "And I stumbled across this old newspaper article from the 1970s talking about a string of unsolved cases in Westfield. Apparently there was this urban legend that the locals were whispering about, something called the Slender Man." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine and she exchanged a meaningful glance with Tom. "The Slender Man?" she echoed, her voice laced with a mixture of trepidation and intrigue. "Yeah, it's this tall, faceless figure that's supposedly associated with the disappearances in this area," Jenna continued, oblivious to the shift in her friend's demeanor. "The article mentions a few details about the legend, like how it's been part of local folklore for generations, and how the victims all reported feeling like they were being watched before they vanished." Tom cleared his throat, his expression skeptical. "You can't be serious, Jenna. This sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. You really think there's a connection between an urban legend and the disappearances in Westfield?" Jenna held up her hands in a placating gesture. "I know it sounds crazy, but just hear me out, okay? The article also mentions that the police at the time were completely baffled by the cases, with no leads or suspects. And get this, the disappearances stopped for a while, but then started up again in the 90s, and now we've got another one with Carla." Sarah felt her heart racing, her mind whirling with the implications of Jenna's findings. "So, you're saying this Slender Man thing has been popping up for decades, and it might have something to do with the disappearances in our town?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Jenna replied, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I think we need to dig deeper into this, Sarah. There could be something more to it than just a creepy urban legend." Tom let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his tousled hair. "This is insane. You guys can't seriously be considering looking into some supernatural boogeyman as the reason for Carla's disappearance. We should be working with the police, not chasing after some ghost story. Sarah reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Tom's arm, her expression earnest. I know it sounds crazy, but don't you see? If there's even the slightest chance that this Slender Man legend is connected to what's happening in Westfield, we have to investigate. Carla and all the others deserve answers, and if the police aren't providing them, then we need to take matters into our own hands. Jenna nodded in agreement, her gaze pleading. Come on, Tom. You know Sarah's not going to let this go, and I'm with her on this. We could be onto something big here. Tom looked from one determined face to the other, his own expression conflicted. Finally, he let out a resigned sigh, his shoulders slumping in defeat. All right, fine. But if this turns out to be some wild goose chase, I'm reserving the right to say, I told you so. Sarah couldn't help but smile, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. Deal. Now let's get started. We've got a legend to uncover. The next morning, the trio of college students convened in the dimly lit confines of the campus library, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and determination. Sarah had reached out to their anthropology professor, Dr. Wilkins, hoping he could shed some light on the unsettling Slender Man urban legend that Jenna had uncovered. As they waited for the professor to arrive, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up her spine. The library, usually a sanctuary of knowledge and quiet contemplation, now seemed to carry an air of foreboding, as if the very walls were whispering secrets of the town's dark past. Are you sure this is a good idea, Sarah? Tom murmured, his brow furrowed with concern. I mean, we're basically chasing after some supernatural boogeyman. What if there's nothing to this Slender Man thing at all? Sarah reached out and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. I know it sounds crazy, Tom, but you have to trust me on this. There's something going on in Westfield, something that the police are either ignoring or are too afraid to investigate. If the Slender Man legend is connected to the disappearances, we need to find out the truth. Jenna, who had been typing furiously on her laptop, looked up and nodded in agreement. Sarah's right. I've been doing some more digging, and the more I learn about this Slender Man, the more I think there might be something to it. The legend has been around for centuries, and it's always associated with unexplained disappearances in remote areas. Before Tom could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention to the end of the aisle, and Professor Wilkins emerged, his weathered face etched with a pensive expression. Thank you all for coming, the professor said, his voice low and measured. I must admit, when Sarah mentioned the Slender Man, I was quite intrigued. It's a legend I've come across in my studies, but one that I've always found particularly unsettling. He pulled up a chair and settled into it, his gaze sweeping across the three students. The Slender Man, as you've no doubt learned, is a mysterious and faceless figure that has been part of folklore for generations. He is often described as a tall, thin entity that lurks in the shadows, watching and waiting for his victims. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes burning with a mixture of curiosity and dread. What can you tell us about the origins of the legend, Professor, and how does it connect to the disappearances in Westfield? Dr. Wilkins sighed and adjusted his glasses, a pensive look in his eyes. The Slender Man has been a part of various cultural myths and legends for centuries, often associated with the unexplained disappearances of children and adults in remote, isolated areas. The specifics of the legend vary, but the core elements, the tall, faceless figure, the sense of being watched, and the victim's subsequent vanishing, are consistent across many different traditions. He paused, his gaze distant, as if recalling some long-forgotten memory. In the case of Westfield, it's clear that the Slender Man legend has been a part of the town's history for generations. The article Jenna found from the 1970s is just one example of how the legend has resurfaced over the years, often in conjunction with these unexplained disappearances. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his skepticism still evident. But how can you be sure there's a connection? Couldn't these disappearances be the result of something else entirely? Dr. Wilkins nodded, acknowledging the valid concern. That's a fair question, Tom. The truth is, the connection between the Slender Man legend and the disappearances in Westfield is not conclusively proven. However, the patterns and the historical precedent are certainly troubling. The victims, as the article mentioned, all reported a sense of being watched before they vanished, and the fact that the disappearances seem to come in waves with long periods of respite in between is consistent with the Slender Man's modus operandi. Sarah's brow furrowed as she absorbed the professor's words. So you're saying that the Slender Man might actually be real, that it's not just a myth, but a supernatural entity that's been stalking this town for decades? The professor's expression was grave, his voice tinged with a hint of unease. I'm afraid that's exactly what I'm saying, Sarah. The Slender Man, while rooted in folklore, may very well be a tangible and terrifying presence in Westfield. And if that's the case, then we're dealing with a threat that goes far beyond a simple missing persons case. Jenna's eyes widened, and she quickly began typing on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. Then we need to find out everything we can about this Slender Man. There has to be more information out there, something that can help us understand it and maybe even stop it. Dr. Wilkins nodded, a hint of respect in his gaze. I admire your determination, Jenna, and I'll do what I can to assist you in your research. However, I must caution you all. The Slender Man is not a force to be trifled with. If the legends are true, then it possesses abilities and powers that we cannot fully comprehend. Venturing too deeply into this mystery may put you in grave danger. Sarah straightened her shoulders, her expression resolute. We understand the risks, Professor, but we can't just sit back and let more people disappear. Carla and all the others deserve answers, and if the authorities won't provide them, then we have to take matters into our own hands. Tom reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand, his own expression torn between concern and admiration. I'm with you, Sarah. Even if I think this is insane, I'm not going to let you face it alone. Jenna nodded, her eyes shining with determination. Count me in too. Let's find out the truth, no matter what it takes. Dr. Wilkins studied the trio for a moment, a hint of a rueful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Very well then. I'll do what I can to provide you with the information and resources you need, but please be careful. The Slender Man is a force to be reckoned with, and I fear that your investigation may uncover more than you're prepared to handle. As the students rose to leave, the weight of the task before them heavy on their shoulders, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to venture into a darkness far deeper and more perilous than any of them could have imagined. In the days that followed their meeting with Professor Wilkins, Sarah, Tom, and Jenna found themselves consumed by the unsettling mystery of the Slender Man. What had once been little more than an urban legend now loomed over them like a dark and foreboding specter, its very existence calling into question the nature of reality and the limits of their understanding. Fueled by a mix of curiosity and dread, the trio dove headfirst into their investigation, scouring the archives and crumbling newspaper clippings for any scrap of information that might shed light on the Slender Man's origins and its connection to the disappearances plaguing the town of Westfield. This is insane, Tom muttered, his brow furrowed as he pored over the yellowed pages of an ancient journal. I still can't believe we're actually taking this seriously. What if it's all just a myth, a story to scare people? Sarah reached across the table, her fingers closing around his hand in a reassuring gesture. I know it sounds crazy, Tom, but you have to trust me on this. There's something going on here, something that the police and the townspeople are either ignoring or are too afraid to confront. And if the Slender Man is real, then we have to find a way to stop it before it claims more victims. Jenna, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, looked up from her laptop, where she had been furiously typing away. Sarah's right. The more I dig into this, the more I'm convinced that the Slender Man is more than just a folk tale. The accounts of the victims, the consistent descriptions, the historical patterns, it's all too much to dismiss as mere coincidence. Tom sighed, his expression resigned. All right, fine, but if we're going to do this, we need to be careful. I don't want to end up like Carla or any of the others who've disappeared over the years. Sarah gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her gaze unwavering. We will be, Tom, I promise. We're going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it takes. As the days turned into weeks, the students' investigation deepened, their research uncovering a web of disturbing connections and unsettling revelations. The Slender Man, they learned, had been a part of the town's folklore for generations, its tall, faceless figure whispered about in hushed tones and feared by the local children. The accounts of the victims were particularly chilling, with each one describing a similar experience, a sense of being watched, a prickling of the skin, and then a sudden inexplicable blankness, as if their memories had been wiped clean. In some cases, the victims had reported seeing the Slender Man lurking in the shadows, its featureless face turned towards them, before they vanished without a trace. Jenna's digging into the town's history only served to intensify the group's unease. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she gestured to the screen of her laptop. "There's a pattern of disappearances going back decades, all of them connected to sightings of the Slender Man." Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the information Jenna had uncovered. "And the disappearances always seem to come in waves with long periods of silence in between, just like Professor Wilkins said." Tom shook his head, his expression troubled. "This is insane. How can something like this have been happening for so long and no one's done anything about it?" "Fear, Tom," Sarah replied, her voice grim. "The Slender Man has been a part of this town's history for so long the people are too afraid to confront it. They'd rather ignore it and hope it doesn't come back." Jenna's fingers flew across the keyboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But we can't ignore it. Not anymore. Carla and all the others deserve justice, and if the police won't do anything, then we have to take matters into our own hands." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but the determined glint in Sarah's eyes stopped him short. "All right, fine. What's the plan then?" Sarah's lips curled into a grim smile. "We're going to confront the Slender Man head-on." The trio spent the next few days meticulously planning their strategy, drawing upon the information they had gathered and the insights Professor Wilkins had provided. They scoured the town, searching for any clues or signs that might lead them to the Slender Man's lair, their senses on high alert for any hint of the entity's presence. As they delved deeper into the mystery, the students couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that had settled over them. The very air seemed to crackle with an unseen tension, and the once familiar streets of Westfield now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, each turn potentially leading them closer to the Slender Man's grasp. One night, as they huddled in Sarah's dimly lit apartment, the sound of a sudden, inexplicable thud from the hallway outside sent them all jumping in alarm. Jenna, her face pale, quickly grabbed the flashlight they had brought with them, its beam cutting through the darkness as she cautiously approached the door. "Wait, Jenna," Tom whispered, his voice tight with fear. "What if it's—" But before he could finish his thought, the door swung open, revealing an empty hallway. Jenna's shoulders sagged with relief, and she turned back to her friends, her expression sheepish. "False alarm, I guess," she murmured, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed the flashlight to Sarah. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her own nerves. "It's okay, Jenna, we're all on edge," but her words were cut short by a sudden bone-chilling sensation. A feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes bore into the back of her neck. Slowly she turned, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across the room, and that's when she saw it. Looming in the far corner, its featureless face turned towards them, was the Slender Man. Tall and eerily thin, its long, spindly limbs seemed to blend seamlessly with the shadows, as if it were a part of the very darkness itself. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. "Tom, Jenna," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here." The other two students whirled around, their eyes widening in horror at the sight of the Slender Man. For a moment they were frozen, paralyzed by a primal fear that seemed to seize them from within. But then, something in Sarah snapped, and she surged forward, the beam of the flashlight trained on the entity. "No!" she cried, her voice a mixture of defiance and terror. "You're not taking us, too." Tom and Jenna, spurred on by Sarah's bravery, quickly flanked her, their own expressions hardening with determination. Together they advanced on the Slender Man, their improvised weapons, a bat and a tire iron, gripped tightly in their hands. The Slender Man, seemingly unperturbed by their display of resistance, began to move, its long limbs undulating with a fluid, unnatural grace. It advanced towards them, its featureless face turning from one student to the next, and in that moment Sarah felt a sense of profound dread wash over her. This was no mere urban legend. The Slender Man was very real, and it was here in their midst, ready to claim them as its next victims. And as the trio steeled themselves for a confrontation with the unknown, they knew that their lives hung in the balance, the fate of their town and all those who had come before them resting squarely on their shoulders.